Sometimes life's greatest heartbreaks lead to its most unexpected miracles, and that's exactly what happened the night she was left sitting alone at a wedding table, tears in her eyes, not knowing her life was about to change at 30,000 feet. She sat at the round table, draped in silver linen and surrounded by candlelight, her fingers nervously circling the rim of her champagne glass. Around her, laughter echoed like a melody she no longer belonged to. The wedding hall shimmered with joy couples twirling under golden chandeliers, families capturing memories, friends toasting to love. But in that beautiful chaos, she felt invisible. Her plus one, the man she thought she'd share the night with, had vanished into the crowd, his phone silent, his seat empty. Every time she glanced toward the dance floor, her chest tightened a little more, because there he was, laughing with someone else, someone he hadn't introduced her to. Her throat burned as she forced a smile for the bridesmaid walking by. She didn't want pity, not tonight, not ever. But inside, a familiar ache crept in. It wasn't just about being left alone at a wedding. It was about every moment in her life she had settled for less than she deserved. Every time she gave her all, hoping to be chosen, only to end up watching from the sidelines. Her heart whispered questions she couldn't answer. Why wasn't I enough? Why does everyone else seem to find love so easily? She excused herself quietly, her heels clicking against the marble floor, trying to hold her tears until she reached the hallway. The night air outside was cold, sharp against her skin, but it was honest. Inside that ballroom, everything was polished, rehearsed, and fake. Out here, under the pale moonlight, she could finally breathe. She leaned against a stone pillar, her breath trembling as she stared at her reflection in the window. The makeup was perfect, the dress elegant, but her eyes told the truth. They were tired, tired of pretending, tired of giving so much and getting so little. For the first time that night, she whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time I stop chasing people who never look back." The words hung in the air, soft but defiant, as if her soul had been waiting years to say them aloud. Inside the ballroom, the music changed, a slow romantic song, the kind that used to make her heart race, but this time it made her feel small. She watched couples sway through the window, not out of envy, but awakening. She realized she had been living her life waiting for someone to make her feel chosen, special, seen. Yet here she was, standing alone, and the world hadn't ended. Maybe being alone wasn't the punishment she thought it was. Maybe it was the invitation she had been avoiding, the one that led back to herself. She took off her heels and walked toward the edge of the garden. The grass was cool beneath her feet, grounding her. She could hear the hum of traffic in the distance and the faint laughter from inside, but for once, she didn't feel the urge to return. Her loneliness began to shift. It didn't feel like rejection anymore. It felt like release. The kind of quiet that comes before something new begins. She sat on a garden bench, closed her eyes, and let the silence wrap around her. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Sometimes, being left behind is life's way of pulling you in a new direction." She smiled faintly, wondering if that could be true. And that's when something inside her began to change. It wasn't dramatic, no tears, no grand epiphany, just a subtle but certain awareness. Maybe this night wasn't about loss. Maybe it was the universe's way of clearing space. Maybe the man who left her wasn't the one who was supposed to stay. The pain was still there, yes, but beneath it was something stronger, a flicker of courage, of curiosity. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her story began, not the one she thought she was living, but the one life had been waiting to write for her. She would leave that wedding alone, but not broken. Every step away from that ballroom would lead her closer to something extraordinary, something she couldn't have imagined. Tonight, rejection had shown up dressed as heartbreak, but in truth, it was the first sign of destiny, because sometimes, before life takes you higher than you've ever dreamed, it first brings you face to face with the version of yourself you must finally let go of. She had no plan when she left the wedding, only a quiet decision: don't go back. The night felt endless, the streets bathed in the orange glow of streetlights and soft drizzle. Her mascara had smudged, her curls were loosening, and yet she felt lighter. It was strange, almost freeing, walking through the hotel lobby barefoot, heels in hand, her gown brushing the marble tiles like silk whispers. Guests in suits and glittering dresses passed by, but she didn't care anymore about appearances. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't pretending to be okay. She simply was. She stopped at the hotel bar, drawn by the low hum of jazz and the soft clinking of glasses. The room was dimly lit, filled with strangers lost in their own world. She took a seat at the corner, away from the crowd, ordering a glass of water instead of wine. It wasn't sadness now, it was clarity. As she sipped, she stared at the bubbles rising and thought about all the times she'd tried to fill her life with noise to drown out her thoughts. Tonight, silence was different. It wasn't lonely, it was honest. Rough night. A voice said, deep calm with a hint of curiosity. She looked up, startled. The man sitting a few seats away had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but commanded it anyway. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, his tie undone, a quiet confidence about him. His eyes weren't the kind that scanned the room for attention. They observed, listened, calculated. But there was warmth there too, something gentle beneath the polished exterior. She gave a faint smile. You could say that. Weddings aren't always fairy tales. He chuckled softly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. No, they're not. They just remind us of everything we're still searching for. The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. There was no pity, no pretense, just understanding. She wasn't sure why, but she felt safe in that moment. The conversation flowed easily, unexpectedly. They talked about travel, dreams, books she loved, and places he'd seen. Every sentence peeled away a layer of the evening's pain, replacing it with something she hadn't felt in a long time: connection. There was something mysterious about him. He never mentioned his full name, nor did he brag about himself. He asked questions that made her think about who she was beyond heartbreak, beyond expectations. He listened as if every word she said mattered, as if he could see through the masks she'd worn for years. She told him things she hadn't even told her friends about: her fears, her disappointments, her quiet hopes that she still might find something extraordinary in an ordinary life. And every time she laughed, he looked at her like he was memorizing the sound. As the night deepened, the bar emptied, leaving just the two of them. The world outside was still raining, soft, steady, like music. He glanced at his watch and smiled faintly. I have to leave soon, he said, but would you like to come see the city from above before I go? She raised an eyebrow, half amused, half intrigued. From above? He nodded. I have a plane waiting. A short flight, quiet skies, no destinations, just perspective. She laughed nervously, unsure if he was serious. You mean a jet, as in private jet? He smiled, something like that. It sounded insane. She barely knew him. Every rational thought screamed don't, and yet something deep within whispered why not. Maybe it was the way he spoke, calm, not persuasive. Or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in months she felt truly seen. This wasn't about glamour or adventure. It was about feeling alive again. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass, heart racing. You don't even know my name, she said softly. He leaned slightly forward. Then tell me, and I'll never forget it. It was reckless, unplanned, completely out of character, and yet she found herself saying yes. Minutes later, she stood at the edge of the hotel driveway as a sleek black car pulled up. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. As the driver opened the door, she hesitated one last time, not out of fear, but awe. Somewhere deep down, she knew this was the moment life was shifting. The kind of moment people look back on years later and realize everything changed there. She took a deep breath, stepped inside, and looked at him. I don't know where this goes, she said. He smiled, eyes meeting hers. Neither do I. But sometimes not knowing is the start of something unforgettable. The car pulled away from the curb, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and silver. She didn't look back at the wedding, at the hotel, or at the version of herself who waited to be chosen. She only looked forward into the night, into the unknown, toward a story she never saw coming. The car moved smoothly through the sleeping city, headlights cutting through the mist that lingered like a secret. She sat in silence, watching raindrops trace patterns down the tinted window. Her mind raced 1,000 what-ifs colliding in her head, yet her heart felt strangely calm. There was no fear, no guilt, no hesitation. Just curiosity, like she had stepped into a story that wasn't hers, but one she was meant to live. He sat across from her, relaxed, gazing out the opposite window. Every now and then, he'd glance her way, not to study her, but to reassure her. There was a stillness in his presence, the kind that felt earned through experience, through quiet power. It wasn't arrogance, it was composure. The kind that made her wonder what kind of man travels alone at midnight, unbothered, as if the world was always waiting for him. They reached the airport gates, guarded and discreet. The driver exchanged a few quiet words with security before the car rolled through. It was private too private. She stared out at the runway, where a sleek jet gleamed under the floodlights, its metallic body reflecting the night sky. The engines hummed softly, alive but waiting. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a plane, it was a promise, a mystery wrapped in possibility. He turned to her, his voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to come if you don't want to. I don't want this to feel impulsive, only honest." She met his gaze. "Honest," he nodded. "Most people live years making safe choices and still end up wondering what could have been. I stopped wondering a long time ago." The words lingered, stirring something in her. She had spent her life being careful with her heart, her words, her image. But where had it gotten her, sitting alone at weddings, hoping someone would choose her? Maybe it was time to choose herself, to live for the story, not the security. With a shaky exhale, she smiled faintly. "You're right. Maybe tonight I don't want to wonder either." He smiled, not wide, but genuine, and opened the car door. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of jet fuel and rain. As they walked toward the aircraft, her gown fluttered in the breeze, catching the moonlight. The pilot greeted them with a nod, and within minutes, she found herself stepping onto polished steps, leading into a world she never imagined she'd touch. Inside, the cabin glowed softly, cream leather seats, golden accents, and quiet jazz humming from unseen speakers. Everything felt surreal. She brushed her fingers along the edge of a seat, half expecting to wake up from a dream. He poured them both a drink, not champagne, but sparkling water with lime. Simple, unexpected. "I don't drink much," he said, smiling. "Clarity is rarer than alcohol." She laughed, settling into the seat opposite him. "Clarity? I think I lost that a few hours ago." He looked out the window, watching the runway lights flash past. "Maybe you found it instead." The engines roared softly, the plane gliding forward, and then the ground slipped away. The city shrank beneath them, lights twinkling like scattered stars. She pressed her hand to the glass, breath catching in her throat. It was breathtaking. The world below looked peaceful, small, almost fragile. The higher they went, the more her chest loosened, as if every meter upward peeled away a layer of old pain. He broke the silence after a while. "Do you know why I fly so often?" he asked. "It's not for business or comfort. It's because every time I'm up here, I'm reminded how small our problems really are. Perspective, that's the real luxury." She turned to him, his profile outlined by moonlight. "You sound like someone who's been through a lot." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but pain becomes wisdom when you stop running from it." Those words hit deeper than he could have known. She stared out the window again, eyes glistening not with sadness, but with something new. She realized how long she had been running, from heartbreaks, from disappointment, from herself. And now, sitting thousands of feet above the world, she wasn't running anymore. She was rising. He handed her a blanket, his voice quieter now. "Rest for a while. It's a long night, but it doesn't have to be a lonely one." She nodded, grateful. For the first time in years, she wasn't pretending to be strong. She didn't have to. There was peace in the uncertainty, beauty in not knowing what came next. As she leaned her head against the window, clouds drifting by like whispers, she thought about how strange life could be. 12 hours ago, she was a forgotten guest at a wedding. Now, she was flying through the night with a man whose name she didn't even know, but whose presence made her feel seen, truly seen. Maybe this was what it meant to let go, to stop chasing love, and start living it in every unexpected encounter, every wild decision, every leap into the unknown. The hum of the engines became a lullaby, the sky an endless canvas of silver and black. And somewhere between the stars and her own reflection, she smiled, not because she found someone new, but because she finally found herself. The hum of the engines grew softer as the jet pierced through the last layer of clouds. Suddenly, the turbulence faded, and the world below disappeared into a blanket of white mist. Above them, the night sky stretched endlessly, deep indigo fading into velvet black, stars shimmering like scattered diamonds. She had never seen the world this way. It was quiet, infinite, breathtaking, as if all of life's noise had been left far behind. She leaned closer to the window, eyes wide, lips parted in wonder. "It's so peaceful," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. He smiled from across the cabin. "Most people think peace is found by controlling life, but real peace is what happens when you let go." Those words lingered like music in her chest, letting go, 2 words that once terrified her, letting go of control, of people, of the stories she told herself to feel safe. But up here, suspended between earth and sky, it suddenly made sense. Maybe freedom wasn't something you found. Maybe it was what remained when everything false had fallen away. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. She watched the clouds drift by, soft and luminous in the moonlight, and felt the tension in her body slowly melt. The pain from earlier that evening, the rejection, the humiliation, the loneliness, it all felt distant, almost unreal. From this height, even the most painful moments seemed small, powerless. Perspective, that's what he had called it, and she understood now. He broke the silence gently. "You know, when I first started flying, I thought it was about escape, about leaving everything behind. But eventually, I realized you can't really run away from what's inside you. You can only rise above it." She looked at him, intrigued. "So why do you still fly?" He paused, eyes thoughtful. "Because up here, I remember who I am when the world stops demanding something from me. No meetings, no masks, no expectations, just existence, freedom." His words touched something deep within her. She had spent her whole life living for others, being the dependable friend, the forgiving partner, the polite daughter. Always doing what was expected, rarely what was true. But for the first time, she felt something powerful stir inside her, a quiet rebellion. A voice that said, "You can choose yourself now." She unfastened her seatbelt, stood, and walked toward the window on the opposite side. The moonlight spilled across her face, turning her tears into tiny stars. "I think I understand now," she said softly. "It's not about flying away from life, it's about seeing it differently." He nodded, his eyes warm with admiration. "Exactly. Freedom isn't the absence of pain. It's the ability to rise above it and still love what you see." She smiled faintly, feeling her heart expand. For so long, she had associated freedom with escape from heartbreak, from memories, from herself. But as the jet soared higher, she realized true freedom wasn't about leaving things behind. It was about releasing the weight that kept her grounded in fear. Minutes turned into hours. They shared stories not about success or wealth, but about befores. The times when they were lost, afraid, uncertain. He spoke about losing his parents young, about building everything from nothing, and about how loneliness still followed him despite all he had. She listened quietly, realizing that even those who seemed to have everything carried invisible scars. Pain didn't discriminate, it simply taught. When he asked about her, she told him about her life, her ordinary job, her quiet dreams, her habit of pretending everything was fine. She confessed that she often felt like a supporting character in her own story. He listened without interruption, then said something that stayed with her forever. Maybe you weren't supposed to be the main character in someone else's story. Maybe this is the moment you start writing your own. The words hit her heart like a spark in darkness. She turned back to the window, staring at the horizon where night began to fade into a faint streak of gold. Dawn was coming, soft, slow, inevitable, and with it, something inside her shifted permanently. She realized she was no longer the woman who had been left behind at a wedding. That version of her had been grounded by fear, afraid to take risks, afraid to be alone, afraid to believe she was worthy of more. But this new version, the one watching the sun rise from the sky, was lighter, braver, unafraid. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I get it now. Sometimes life forces you to lose what you thought you wanted so it can give you what you actually need." The jet continued to glide through the heavens, chasing the edge of dawn. The clouds glowed pink and gold, painting the sky with promise. She smiled, realizing that the sunrise wasn't just happening outside, it was happening within her. Freedom wasn't a destination. It was a feeling, a flight of the soul. And tonight, she was finally airborne. The sky was a canvas, now streaks of rose gold melting into pale blue as dawn stretched its arms across the horizon. The world below was waking up, though from this height, it looked still a quiet masterpiece painted in clouds and light. She sat in silence, staring through the window, mesmerized. It felt like time had stopped. There was no noise from the world, no buzzing phone, no expectations, just the soft hum of the engines and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. He handed her a cup of coffee, the aroma rich and grounding. "You'd be surprised," he said, "how much you can learn when you stop trying to control every direction you're flying in." She smiled faintly. "You mean just let go?" He nodded. "Exactly. The jet doesn't fight the wind. It moves with it. That's how it stays steady." His words sank into her like sunlight after a long storm. She thought about her life, how she had clung to people who didn't value her, plans that never worked out, dreams she was too afraid to chase. She'd mistaken control for strength when in truth it was fear. The tighter she held on, the more things slipped away. She looked out at the endless expanse before them, whispering almost to herself, "Maybe that's the lesson, isn't it? You can't always steer your life, but you can choose how you fly through it." He smiled, nodding slowly. "Now you're getting it." For the first time, she didn't feel lost. She felt light. Every mile they flew, it was as if another layer of doubt peeled away. The higher they went, the smaller her past seemed, not meaningless, but manageable. The wedding, the rejection, the loneliness, they weren't curses. They were coordinates guiding her here, to this moment, to clarity. As the sun climbed higher, its rays filled the cabin with golden warmth. She stretched out her hand toward the light, smiling softly. "You know what's strange," she said. "Up here, everything looks so simple, beautiful even, but down there, everything feels complicated." He leaned back, eyes following her hand toward the sun. "Perspective, that's the lesson of the jet. From the ground you see chaos, from the sky you see design." She turned to him, curious. "You mean there's always a bigger picture?" He nodded. "Always? But most people never see it because they never rise high enough, not in altitude, but in awareness. They let their pain keep them grounded." She let his words sink in. Maybe pain wasn't meant to destroy her, but to lift her, to give her wings she never knew she had. Maybe heartbreak was the turbulence before the altitude. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. The scent of coffee and clouds filled her lungs. "You make it sound easy," she said. He chuckled. "It's not. Letting go never is. But here's the truth, when you stop forcing life to look the way you imagined, it often gives you something far better." She smiled, a real smile this time, not the polite, practiced kind, but one born from peace. "I think I'm starting to believe that." They sat in quiet companionship, watching the world unfold below them. Cities shimmered like constellations, rivers glistened like silver threads. Every few minutes, she caught herself thinking about how strange it was that a few hours ago, She had been crying in a dark hallway, invisible, heartbroken, forgotten. And now she was thousands of feet above the earth, finding lessons in the clouds. She looked at him again, really looked. For all his mystery, he wasn't unreachable. There was depth in his calmness, and weariness behind his confidence, a man who had seen the heights of success, but still sought meaning in simplicity. And perhaps that was why their connection felt so natural. They weren't two opposites colliding. They were two travelers, both searching for freedom in different skies. He turned to her, his tone soft. "You know what I've learned from flying? What? That the sky is always open, no matter how heavy the storm below. You just have to climb high enough to see it." She held his gaze for a long moment. The words struck her deeper than she expected. Maybe the storms in her life weren't there to destroy her. Maybe they existed to teach her how to rise. She stood and walked toward the front of the cabin, where the pilot's voice gently broke through the intercom. "We're about to begin our descent." Descent, the word echoed in her mind. She didn't want to go back, not to the ground, not to the version of herself who had been afraid of life. But as she looked down at the sprawling land below, she realized something important. The lesson of the jet wasn't about staying above it all. It was about learning to carry that perspective wherever you went. She turned to him, smiling with quiet strength. "Thank you," she said, "for the flight and for the lesson." He smiled back, his eyes kind. "Don't thank me. Just promise me one thing when life feels heavy again. Remember this view." She nodded. "I will." As the jet began its slow descent, she pressed her palm against the window one last time. The sky, endless and forgiving, stared back at her like an old friend. And in that reflection, she no longer saw the woman who had been left behind. She saw a woman who had learned to rise, to release, and to rediscover herself at 30,000 feet. The lesson of the jet was clear: life will always take you through turbulence. But how you fly through it, that's where your freedom begins. The wheels touched down gently, a soft whisper against the runway. She felt the shift, not just the physical descent, but the emotional one. They had returned to Earth, but she wasn't the same woman who had boarded that jet hours ago. Something had changed within her quietly, deeply, permanently. The engines hummed to silence, and for a brief moment she sat still, her hand resting on the armrest, staring out at the rising sun. It painted the horizon in gold and coral, the kind of sunrise that doesn't just brighten the sky, it awakens something inside you. She watched as light spilled over the earth, filling the world below with warmth, and realized that it felt symbolic. The dawn wasn't just happening outside, it was happening within her too. He stood and stretched, glancing toward her with a soft smile. "You okay?" She nodded, returning the smile. "Better than okay. I think I finally understand what this was all about." He tilted his head, curious. "And what's that?" "That sometimes," she said, "you have to lose everything familiar before you can find yourself again." He didn't reply, just smiled knowingly, as if he'd been waiting for her to say it. They disembarked the jet, and the crisp morning air met her face like a gentle reminder of reality. The runway stretched endlessly ahead, and the sound of distant planes echoed faintly across the tarmac. A driver waited with the car door open, but for a moment she didn't move. She wanted to take it in, all of it. The stillness, the sky, the surreal memory of the night she just lived. When she finally stepped down, her heels clicked against the ground, steady, strong, sure. She felt taller somehow, though nothing about her appearance had changed. The difference was internal. For years she had defined herself by who loved her, who left her, and what she had lost. But now she understood her worth was never determined by anyone's ability to see it. It had always been there, quietly waiting for her to look inward. He walked beside her in silence, letting the moment breathe. As they reached the car, he stopped and turned toward her. "Where to now?" he asked softly. She looked at him, then at the open road ahead. It was strange. For the first time, she didn't need to know. "I think," she said with a gentle laugh, "I'll let life surprise me." He smiled. "That's the best kind of plan." As the car pulled away from the runway, she watched the jet grow smaller in the distance. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder of how high she had climbed within herself. That flight had stripped away all her fears, all her doubts, and shown her that she didn't need wings to rise. She only needed courage. Her phone buzzed suddenly, a message from the same man who had abandoned her at the wedding. Her heart didn't race this time. No anger, no sadness, just calm detachment. The message was simple: "Sorry for leaving you alone last night." She looked at it for a moment, then pressed delete. No reply. No closure needed, because closure wasn't something someone else could give you. It was something you gave yourself when you decided the past no longer defined you. She turned her gaze to the window. The city was waking up: commuters, coffee shops, streetlights fading into daylight. Everything looked ordinary again, yet she knew she'd never see the world the same way. The perspective she found thousands of feet above wasn't lost. It lived in her now. As the car drove on, she caught her reflection in the glass, and for the first time in years, she liked what she saw. There was strength in her eyes, serenity in her smile. She wasn't chasing love, approval, or belonging anymore. She was love. She was enough. The memory of his words echoed in her mind: "When life feels heavy again, remember this view." She smiled to herself. She didn't just remember it, she became it. Weeks would pass, and people would notice something different about her. The same woman who once hid her pain behind polite smiles now carried herself with quiet power. She spoke less, but with more truth. She laughed freely, not to fill silence, but because she genuinely felt joy. She made choices not out of fear, but out of freedom. Sometimes at night, when she'd look up at the stars, she'd think of that flight, that night suspended between heartbreak and rebirth, and whisper a silent thank you to the man who'd been both a stranger and a guide. But she knew now the real transformation hadn't come from him, or the jet, or the view. It had come from her, from the moment she chose to say yes to the unknown, from the courage it took to walk away from what broke her and step into what healed her. And though their paths might never cross again, she knew that some encounters aren't meant to last a lifetime, they're meant to change one. As the sun fully broke over the horizon, she took a deep breath and smiled, not because everything made sense, but because it finally didn't need to. The woman who had once been left alone at a wedding had now found something far greater than companionship. She had found herself. And sometimes that's the most beautiful ending of all. As she walked into the brightness of a brand new day, she realized something profound: not every heartbreak is meant to break you. Some are designed to wake you, to strip away what's false so you can finally meet the person you were always meant to become. She was no longer the woman who waited for a text, a promise, or a fairy tale ending. She was her own beginning, now fierce, free, and unshakably whole. The world hadn't changed overnight, but she had. And that made all the difference, because sometimes the night you're left sitting alone at a wedding is the night the universe whispers, "Your story isn't over, it's just taking off." The private jet wasn't just a moment of luxury, it was a mirror, reflecting what had always been within her: strength, courage, and the power to rise. So if life ever leaves you behind, don't curse the silence. Don't chase what's gone. Stand tall. Look up. Because one day, you'll realize the very pain that grounded you was only preparing you for flight. And when you finally take off, you'll understand you were never left alone. You were simply being shown how to fly.